Approximately 760 years before the birth of Christ, Jeroboam II ruled over the prosperous northern kingdom of Israel. Despite territorial expansion and prosperity, moral and spiritual decay permeated society. Idolatry, especially introduced by Jeroboam's golden calves, brought evils such as alcoholism and religious prostitution. God, viewing the nation as his spouse, chose the prophet Amos to warn of impending judgment. Later, Hosea, instructed by God, married Gomer, a woman affected by moral decay, symbolizing God's relationship with Israel. The marriage initially flourished, but Gomer strayed. After bearing children, her escapades led to ruin. However, guided by divine love, Hosea sought her, bought her back from the slave market, and restored her as his wife. This act exemplifies the forgiveness and love that God has for his people, even in the face of unfaithfulness. The story underscores the need for unlimited forgiveness, emphasizing that forgiving is not accepting sin but seeking restoration. God's forgiving love, exemplified by Hosea, teaches us that, like him, we should constantly forgive, bearing the weight of others' sins and seeking reconciliation. Welcome to the Culture and Curiosities channel. Who was Gomer in the Bible? The story of Hosea's wife. Gomer, mentioned in the Old Testament, was the wife of the prophet Hosea. Her primary known characteristic in the Bible is her infidelity. The exact meaning of her name, possibly perfection or wholeness, is not entirely clear. Historical context. Gomer lived during the 8th century BCE in Israel during the divided kingdom period. The northern kingdom, where Gomer and Hosea lived, was ruled by Jeroboam II. The social and religious context was marked by prosperity, but also by injustice, corruption, and religious apostasy. Marriage of Gomer and Hosea. God instructed Hosea to marry Gomer, wife of whoredom, and have children of whoredom, as a symbolic representation of Israel's turning away from the Lord. Gomer bore 3 children, Jezreel, Lo-ruhamah, and Lo-ammi, each symbolizing aspects of Israel's unfaithfulness. Meanings of Gomer's children. Jezreel represented God's imminent judgment on Israel. Lo-ruhamah symbolized the lack of divine compassion for unrepentant Israel. Lo-ammi indicated the complete violation of the covenant, no longer recognized as the people of God. Reconciliation and promise of forgiveness. The biblical account doesn't confirm if all the children were biologically Hosea's, but highlights Gomer's unfaithfulness. The marriage between Gomer and Hosea is considered real but with symbolic purposes. Just as Hosea reconciled with Gomer, representing divine grace, the promise of forgiveness and future blessings was fulfilled in Christ. Gomer figuratively represents all unfaithful sinners who, by God's grace, are reconciled with him through the redemptive work of Christ. Sometimes, we make minor mistakes in our daily lives that require forgiveness, perhaps a harsh word or an impulsive accusation. However, instead of releasing these incidents, we allow the hurt to accumulate, corroding our relationships with bitterness and resentment. Whether a minor mistake or something more serious, like Gomer's sin, we tend to dwell on the issue, unconsciously punishing ourselves by repeatedly bringing it to mind. We deal with significant hurts that may persist in our thoughts, requiring time for healing. Nevertheless, with each return of these destructive thoughts, it's crucial to remind ourselves that we have already forgiven, reinforcing how much we have been forgiven by God. We should ask Him to remove harmful feelings from our minds. Forgiving doesn't imply silently enduring. The need for open communication requires us to express our thoughts and feelings, openly discussing our hurts and seeking support from our spouse to overcome them. Expressing our concerns with love and care is vital, as we share what's in our hearts, fulfilling our need and obligation. Furthermore, forgiving doesn't necessarily mean passively accepting recurring mistakes. It may require deep reflection on our personality and habits, eventually resulting in lifestyle changes. Just as God takes positive steps to guide us, we can consider strategies to help us avoid pitfalls in the future. At the core of forgiveness is the willingness to bear the other person's sin, refraining from retaliating or making the guilty party pay for their mistakes. Absolving them of all guilt is essential. This forgiving love can be a powerful tool to transform hearts and lives in surprising ways. The story of Hosea and Gomer highlights the lesson of forgiveness, where God's love and forgiveness permeate the entire narrative. Although God doesn't turn a blind eye to sin, His constant love for sinners is evident in the history of Israel. Even in the face of the people's recurring errors, He never stopped loving them. Similarly, we should love and forgive, bringing our wounds to the cross of Christ, where we deposit our guilt and find divine forgiveness. By forgiving completely, we free our minds from resentment, breaking down barriers that hinder growth in our relationships.